Hey, it's Kevin DeWitt here, and welcome to a follow-up to the plugin knowledge session I did on the Waves CLA MixHub. So I've had a lot of people watch that little tutorial I did. Well, not little, it's quite long. And I had quite a few comments, and one of the ones that I found thought was interesting and worth trying out, or intrigued myself, was the performance of the plugin itself and how it would work in your system. Now, I didn't do that because I just did a run through of the plugin and showed the interface, etc., and just had a few instances of it loaded up. But if you watch that video, the concept of it is, and the whole bucket system is that if you want to emulate an SSL console like CLA's, you would put this plugin on every track, pretty much every track in your mixing session, and then you would lay it out in the buckets and have it all nicely laid out, etc. And it's limited to 64. So obviously you can only have 64 tracks with this plugin on it. And is that reasonable? Is it not? How is your system going to perform? Now, obviously it depends on what system you're running and everything else. So I've got a PC here, and I will show you the specs of it in a minute to a point. I'm not going to show you all the specs, but the CPU and RAM to give you an idea. And I'll give you an idea of the CPU and that with the a session here without the plugin, and then with me setting up the plugin as if I was going to use it for real. So I'm showing you a session here that is actually a real mixing session. It's a very good example of what I will have. So if I don't get the plugin up to 64, I will show you what a realistic session is, but then I will push it to the whole 64 because if I don't get there in this one, there can be sessions that can get up to 64 tracks. And since the plugin says you can do that, why not see what it does? So I'll show you the values and I'll show you how it performs on my system. Whether it performs on yours will be up to you to find out. And since Waves allow you to get a demo version, it's probably worth a try to see what you get out of it. So I'm going to try to do this as realistic as possible and not just push this to stupidity. But I obviously do want to take it to the end as well to see what it gets. So hopefully this helps you out and gives me an idea of how it will perform. So let's get into it and see what we can get out of it. All right, so first off, you may be wondering what I've got on my system here, and you'll see here it is a Intel Core i7-4790K CPU, 4 gigahertz with 16 gig of RAM. So this is a good system. It is not an overblown system. I'm running Windows 10 Professional, running at 64-bit operating system. Okay, so it's not a Mac or anything like that. So if you need to test this on a Mac, you'll need to do it yourself. But here's an example of Windows 10. And obviously, if you have a processor similar to this and an amount of RAM similar to this. Okay, so what I have right now is I have Cubase 10 open. I have some recording software open and some other things that I cannot avoid not having open. So they're obviously using some CPU processing as well that normally would not be there while I'm doing a mix, but obviously Cubase 10 will be. And this is actually a mix that I have been working on. But right now what I have done is I have cleared out all of the plugins, all of the sends. So all we have is the audio and the layout with my template. So this is a realistic mix for me with templates, etc. But obviously I've got no plugins on here at all. I've removed every plugin, every EQ setting, every send, nothing at all. So it is pure audio. And where we're sitting right now, just without doing anything, is 20% CPU, 29% memory. All right, now what I'm going to quickly do is I'm just going to play the audio for a minute. I've got it turned down a bit because the point is not listening to the audio. The point is just playing the system. So I'm just going to play the audio and see what that does to the CPU and memory. Okay, so now memory stayed the same. We're at 24% CPU. And with the music stopped, is settled back down to 20% there. So 4% increase playing the music there. Okay, so now I'm going to load the Waves CLA MixHub on every track that I would normally put this on. Now, in my templates, I use the UAD SSL, so this is not an uncommon thing for me to do, but I'm going to obviously do it with this Waves CLA MixHub, and I will load it on every track at its default state, and we'll see what that does, and then we will start doing some settings and things like that, not proper mixing, but just as in what I would probably have done to a mix as an example, and see what that does. So I'm going to cut to me having already loaded this plugin now. Okay, so we're back now, and I have loaded the CLA MixHub on every track that I would have loaded an SSL console emulation on my mix. Now, what I have done is if it is a stereo track, I have placed the stereo version of the plugin. And if it is a mono track, I have placed a mono version of the plugin. And as you can see, I've placed it in the exact places I would have put this. So if I have a bus like here where I've got 3 kick drums, I would have actually just put it on the bus in this instance. And you can see I've done that in all the spots here. So we have quite a few tracks, and we've got buses and everything else. So all I've done is load it. I have not done anything to it. I have not made any settings. I've not set up the buckets. I've done nothing like that. I've just loaded the plugin on each of the tracks, as I said, in stereo mono to match the actual track. Okay, and what we've got straight away without playing anything is now we're at 31%, 34% memory. And now if we play the track, all right, 35%, 34% memory. So far, so good. Okay, so now I'm going to go through and I'm just going to set up the buckets. I'm not going to set anything else, just set up the buckets and the views so it looks nice, as if I was going to save this into a template. So just as a note, as I'm setting up these buckets, one first limitation that I've come across right now that it's a little bit annoying in this regard. Obviously, we can work around it. But in this case here, I have gone to set up my first bucket and I would have made them my drums. But as you can see, I've already hit my 8 channels with the drums straight away and I didn't even get them in. So obviously I need to create 2 buckets for drums alone. Okay, so I've got my bucket set up and I'm just going to give you my honest opinion. It's a little bit limiting for me in the way I would like to structure it. Look, it's a good idea and a great concept, but I'm not happy with the fact that things are split up like this. This is not really going to speed things up for me if I've got to keep switching between 2 different things. So I've done it pretty rough. It's not perfect, but you get the idea here. So obviously I've got drums 1. I've put all these drums in. Drums 2, I've got these, including buses and effects. Now, Obviously, before anybody puts in a comment, I could have put all the toms in one bus. So, I could start being a little bit smarter with how I do things, reduce my load of plugins and that sort of stuff. But, sometimes you just want to have things separate and not have to be restricted to the way things are. That's the beauty of plugins. So it can be a little bit annoying to restrict yourself with plugins, but anyway, let's continue on. So we've got 2 buckets for drums, so you can see we've got a couple of spare slots there, which we could fill up. Bass, we've got a few extra slots, so again, we've got the actual instrument tracks and parallel bass effects and its bus. Guitars I've had to break up over 2 buckets as well, because we had so many guitars, and then effects and bus. Then we got miscellaneous, and this is where I start to not like it because we're starting to just chuck random stuff in this bucket because we're running out of buckets. Now, I guess from my perspective, if I was to change one thing, if I had one choice to change one thing, I would allow more buckets. I could probably live with the limit of 8 plugins in a bucket, but the limitation of how many buckets you have is what I'm not quite happy with, because I've got percussion here, then I've chucked in a bus for orchestral and keyboards and samples. Now, luckily this song doesn't have any of those tracks, but if it did, then it would just get messy because, miscellaneous. And then I've got a Vox one. So we've got some Vox tracks, again, effects buses. And again, we've got other. So I've got mix bus, effects bus. I've got some reverbs, and I've had to put my BGVs in here. And this is why I'm saying it would be great if they added more buckets, because then I could have a orchestral, a percussion, keyboards, samples, BGVs, buses, effects, whatever you wanted. But with this bucket system here, you're very limited in that. I possibly could have just snuck them in if I didn't have to use two of these. So that's what I'm saying. If there was an option between increasing the amount of plugins in a bucket or the amount of buckets, and I could only pick one, I would say give me more buckets. But anyway, that is, again, not the point of this, but I figured I'd give you my feedback while I was setting this up. So having set that up, we are looking at CPU pretty much unchanged, so that doesn't seem to have any impact on it. Let's just play it. So we're still going okay here. 36%, 34%. Okay, so before I actually do any settings, one thing I did notice, which I didn't actually notice when I put this on, is that the default state is that they're all turned off. You'll see that every single plugin and section, well, not the output, but dynamics are all turned off, EQs are all turned off, and inputs are all turned off. So let's do the obvious first one. And the first one for me is the input. I want to replicate an SSL console. So at least I'm going to want the input turned on to give us some analog. Now I would leave noise off because that's just me. I don't want this little rubbish noise down the bottom, but I want the analog on for sure. So I'm going to go through and turn all of those on and see what impact that has. Okay, so right now I have just turned on all of the inputs. I've made no changes to the settings other than turn them on. And here we are now. CPU is getting close to 50%. And let's play. So CPU is sitting close, 50%, jumps up a little bit here and there. Memory hasn't really changed. Okay, so we're still functioning now. So let's just make some settings here on these modules. So I'm just gonna adjust the line on each of these. Put a filter on. Okay, so every track I have adjusted the line level a little bit and put some sort of filter on. Some of them I've put a couple of filters, but everything is now doing something in these modules here. And that's really had no impact in the just basic sitting there. Now if we play it, so not much change there. So mainly the main impact there is actually turning the modules on. All right, so now what if we assume we did a little bit of EQ on every channel as well? Okay, so I have turned on the EQ section of every single one. I have not actually done any settings. I've just turned the EQ on. And now we are sitting at a pretty high rate there, 80%. Now, obviously, Cubase itself is only 60%, but you do have to expect your system is going to be doing other things. As I said, I am running some additional stuff to record this, but still. And if we press play, okay, we're sitting at 85% CPU now, so we're starting to get a little bit high there. Now, let's just randomly do some settings. I don't know if this is going to make any changes whatsoever. Okay, so I've randomly just turned on a knob, pressed a button, whatever else on any of these EQ settings. I've done it on every single one because I'm assuming that if I've turned the EQ on, I've probably done a setting. Okay, we're sitting at about there, 80% again. Okay, so going by that, once you turn the module on, that pretty much indicates what it's going to do. It doesn't seem that the settings have any greater impact to it once you turn the module on. You're doing something. All right, now we still have the dynamic section and there's all these advanced features, but let's just turn all the dynamics on now. All right, so I have turned the dynamics modules on for all of these plugins. Haven't done any settings. You might be wondering if this is a realistic test. Well, you might not do this on every track, but if you've got it sitting there, should you expect to be able to? Why not? If you've got a mixing desk, you would. Okay, we're sitting up close to 90% now. And you can see there it is not playing. It is not happy at all right now. Okay, I haven't changed any settings. I don't know if that would have an impact on it. Okay, I don't think that's having any impact. Definitely does not want to play right now. Now, if you are curious, I am running this at a buffer of 1024. So that is not by any means a low level of buffer. We could obviously go higher. So, and I haven't even loaded all 64 plugins in. So let's start turning these off. Okay, we're getting closer. So close. We're pretty close there. Okay, so we've got all the plugins with all the features on. Okay, so I've got them all back on again, and we can see it's not working. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off all the sections in one bucket. Okay, I think that is working okay. Let's turn one plugin on a time. All right, so I think I've got it to a level where it's very borderline. We are really pushing our limits here. Bit of choppiness, bit of cutting in and out, but just hanging in there. All right, so we're just hanging in there, and we have 1, 2, 3, that's obviously 8. Okay, so I've just added them up, and I calculate 47 plugins roughly, and my system is dead to the water after that. So we have a limitation of 64, but I can't even get there. Now, said buffer is 1024. I could blow the buffer out to 2048 and possibly get a little bit more into it. But 1024 to me is pretty reasonable level for latency on that one for buffers. So there you go. That's what it's doing. And you can see it's just sitting there pretty maxed out. As I said, I am recording, so you can push it a little bit higher, but I don't think on a system like mine, I'm not going to get to 64, even if I was not recording and was not doing this. All right, so there you go. There is the Waves CLA MixHub performing on my system in a realistic sort of mix that I would do size-wise, and also pushed to the 64 track limit. So what did you think? Let me know in the comments. Let me know whether you think that you could get the maximum benefit out of this, or whether you think it's a plugin that's just not realistic for what it's trying to achieve in your DAW. So yeah, let me know. And don't forget, if you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe to my channel and check out my other videos. Obviously, check out the tutorial of this plugin if you haven't already. And hopefully it's been helpful. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.